This is a Johnson University online tutorial. Setting up the gradebook. A gradebook essentially provides a framework for recording, computing, and communicating information to students about how well they're doing in a course. The gradebook tool in Sakai is no less than that. It provides a means by which an instructor can record, compute, and provide overall course feedback to students about their progress in the course. While there are various methods of assessing students' overall accomplishment of a course's objectives, providing an overall letter grade based on an accumulation of other gradebook entries is standard practice, and students can view the gradebook and know how they're doing. Step 1. Choose how to organize the gradebook. As an instructor or course designer, one of your tasks is to make a determination on how a student's overall course grade will be calculated. It's important to define what sort of grading framework you'll be using to determine a student's overall course grade. This can be done in any number of ways, including designating several items with varied point values so that the number of earned points divided by the total points possible yields an overall course grade. Designating groups of items just to organize them, without the groups having more or less impact on the overall course grade. Or designating groups of items into discrete categories by type, which themselves make up the overall course grade. Or designating groups of items into discrete categories by unit or week, which themselves make up the overall course grade. More specifically, you'll need to also determine the grade scale. You may need to use one specified by your school's dean or program director, or you may be permitted to determine the scale yourself. Sakai uses a 10-point scale by default, which is not the same as the university-adopted point scale. Be sure to double-check the grading scale as you start to set up the course gradebook. There may be other questions to consider as you go about organizing the gradebook. Will you base your course on a set number of points? Will each item in your course be worth the same number of points? Will quizzes or tests, for example, have greater worth toward the course grade than, say, homework assignments? Any of these questions can help refine and define how you want to set up the gradebook. It's recommended that the gradebook be set up based on a point system, rather than using a percentage-based system for each gradebook item. The scope of this tutorial aims to show you the following ways you can set up the gradebook. Weighting each gradebook item individually or simple, placing each gradebook item into a category, categories only, placing each gradebook item into a weighted category, complex by type. Step 2. Gradebook Setup, Simple Method. In the first of the three methods, weighting each graded assignment or assessment individually, I've decided to have the following items as gradebook entries in my course. Note that each item is assigned a specific point value. The overall course grade for the course is the total number of points earned divided by the number of points possible. In this case, there are 1,000 points possible. Based on the university-adopted grade scale, a student earning a total of 865 points would earn a solid B. It should be noted that a feature of the gradebook is to do just this function, provide an overall course grade based on the number of total possible points divided by the total earned points. So with this method, I've thought ahead of time about the individual items or learning experiences and assessments that students will engage in the course, electing some of the items to be of greater worth than others. Each quiz, for example, is valued less than the midterm exam or the forum discussions. Keep your course objectives in mind when assigning point values to gradebook items. So, in this example, if I were to begin setting this up in the gradebook, I first want to go to the course, click on Gradebook, and then Settings to double-check the overall grading scale for the course under Grading Schema. The scale here doesn't specify the scale for individual gradebook items. Rather, it specifies the scale for the overall course grade. This specifies the minimum percentage needed to earn the course grade specified. Notice that the default scale does not take rounding preference into account. I'm going to replace the default grading scale with the one used by the university, taking rounding into account. There. Now, this means that a student whose individual gradebook items earn a 90.5 course grade earns a B+ for the course. Now that I've chosen my gradebook settings, it's time to go set up each of the individual items in the gradebook. I'm going to add the following items to the gradebook directly: Unit 1 activity, Unit 2 activity, and Unit 3 activity. Each of these items is valued at 50 points, or 50 points out of the total 1,000 possible in the course. To add each of these entries, in Gradebook, under the Grades tab, I'll click Add Gradebook Item. In the Add Gradebook Item window, I'll add the title and point value. I can set the date here if I want. Notice as I add the item, there is a check mark next to Release this item to students by default. This means that students will see the item in the gradebook when they log into the course. An additional item can be checked. Include this item in the course grade calculations. If you want this item to be included as part of the student's overall course grade calculation, you need to make sure there's a check mark here. I'll continue to add the remaining 2 similar items the same way, clicking the Add Gradebook item for each. Now that I've finished adding these 3 items, they're listed in the gradebook, each valued at 50 points. The next step is to add some of the other items that make up the student's overall course grade. And in this example, I'm specifically referencing the following items: paper first draft, paper second draft, paper final, forum discussions, quizzes, midterm, and final exams. I could go on and keep adding each of these items to the gradebook this way, manually, and by doing so have all the items in the gradebook that make up the course grade for all students taking the course. It's important, however, to note that some of the other tools in Sakai are designed to work with the gradebook and pass scores and comments to the gradebook. For example, the Testing Quizzes tool, where students will take all the quizzes and exams, can be set up to record a student's assessment score in the gradebook as soon as they complete the assessment. In this case, Testing Quizzes will create the gradebook entry, so I don't have to create an entry myself. The Assignments tool, in similar fashion, can pass information in the form of a score and comments to the gradebook, creating the gradebook entry just as Testing Quizzes does. There are different advantages to creating all of your gradebook entry items manually or allowing other tools to do so, which is a topic that is beyond the scope of this tutorial. For this course, I'm going to have the Assignments and Testing Quiz tools create the gradebook entries automatically using the settings in those tools. Forums cannot automatically create gradebook entries, specifically because forums can be graded at multiple levels: overall participation, initial posting, replies. So I will have to create those gradebook entries manually, one for each discussion. Creating manual discussion form entries in the gradebook ahead of time allows me to specify which forms will be scored and to directly grade forms while viewing form entries. Forms set up in this way will pass entered point values in the discussion forums directly to the gradebook. Other tutorials and information are available on the use of other tools with the gradebook. So, back to the gradebook we're working on. I'm going to go ahead and create the remaining entries, some of which come from other tools. Now that I have all the entries entered as I'd like, I can see how they appear in the gradebook summary view by student. You should also notice that any entry with a lock is an entry created by some other tool in Sakai for use in the gradebook. I can see which tool created the entry by looking at the icon to the left of the entry title. This concludes the section on how to set up the gradebook using the simple method. Using this setup, a student's score will be calculated based on a simple division problem: total number of earned points out of total points possible. If you want to organize the gradebook a bit more, then continue on to the next step: categories. Step 3. Gradebook setup using categories. This next section will cover how to use categories to organize the gradebook. It's possible at this point that you'd like to provide some upper-level organization to the items in the gradebook, both for your benefit and for your students. One way to do so is to use categories. As I look at the grade summary view by student, I notice the items aren't as organized as I'd like them to be. The first thing that comes to mind is to organize them by type, and I can do so by using categories. I'm going to click on Settings and go to the Categories and Weighting area. I'm going to select the option for Categories Only. When I do, the window changes slightly and I have an area below where I can specify category names. Here, I can enter categories using the Add a Category button and select the Save Changes button at the bottom when I'm done. I can even change the order of the categories if I wish. I've decided to specify the following categories: activities, papers, quizzes, discussions, and exams. After specifying my categories, upon return to the Grades tab, I can see all of my gradebook items are still here, in Gradebook Summary View by student. But now they're all placed into an uncategorized category. I'm going to stop here and point out a critical step, one I've deliberately left out until now. Now that I have categories created, I now need to place each gradebook item into its corresponding gradebook category. To do so, I need to select Edit Item Details for each gradebook item and specify its category using the Category drop-down menu. I have to do this for every single item I've entered into the gradebook, both those created manually and those generated by other Sakai tools. In short, I've got a lot of work ahead of me. Here's the point. If you have in mind to use categories, it's to your benefit that you set up the categories before creating even the first gradebook entry. Doing so allows you to specify the categories as you set up the entries, making the process much more efficient and less frustrating for you. To do so, simply create your gradebook categories under Gradebook Settings, selecting Categories Only under the Categories and Waiting area. Okay, give me a second here, I need to fix all of these. Okay, now that I've fixed all those entries, you can see what the gradebook looks like now in Grade Summary View by student. All of my gradebook entries are neatly inside their categories. While it won't be demonstrated here, you can also elect to organize gradebook items by unit or chronologically as they occur in the course. If this suffices for your needs, feel free to move on to the next step in the course development process. Step 4. Complex by type. This next section will cover how to go even further with the gradebook by using categories and weighting. A benefit of using categories and weighting is that it lets you lump several gradebook items into a specified category, allowing a collective of categories to make up the student's overall course grade. This allows you some flexibility when assigning point values to individual gradebook items. For example, if I know that I want the final exam to be worth 25% of the overall course grade, I don't have to find out what 25% of the total number of points are in the course. I merely create a gradebook entry and place it into a category that's weighted at 25% of the course grade. The gradebook does the rest of the math for me. Using categories and weighting also enables some other advanced gradebook features, such as drop highest, drop lowest, or keep highest for any number of items in a category. Okay, so let's take a look at the gradebook once more. Using the points I specified earlier, each of the categories here would be equivalent to the following percentages: activities 15%, papers 35%, quizzes 15%, discussions 15%, and exams 20%. The benefit here is that I can now score each of the individual gradebook items on 100 points if I want, and the gradebook will do all the math for me. Even if I make each quiz worth 10,000 points each, they'll still only amount to 15% of the overall grade. To set this up, under Settings, Categories and Weighting, select Categories and Weighting. In the area below, specify each category and the percent of the overall grade attributed to that category, making sure all the percentages add up to 100 and saving your changes at the bottom of the page. As long as your gradebook items are categorized accordingly, overall course grades will be the result of these weighted categories. As a reminder, if you're thinking about using categories and weighting, be sure to set this up first before creating any gradebook entries. One other item to mention is an option under the Settings tab under Grade Release Rules. If you want students to see their overall course grade, there must be a check mark next to Display Final Course Grade to Students. While students will be able to see each individual gradebook item, the computed overall grade will be hidden from student view unless there's a check mark here. Now that we have our gradebook set up, how do we go about entering grades? Yeah, that's a tutorial reserved for another time. More information on these and other topics is available in other tutorials and documentation. This is a Johnson University online tutorial.